We're going to do a brief recap of the hour log. So you guys had some homework from yesterday. Hopefully you got a chance to check that out. Then we'll talk through suspensions and exits. So speaking of the member hour log, this is a required piece of documentation for AmeriCorps. We do ask that you use our template, and we're going to walk through the value of the template in a second. If you would like to use something other than our template, please talk to your portfolio manager so that we can see what you're using and make sure it meets all of the AmeriCorps requirements. So there's a lot going on here, and let's kind of talk through the different elements and kind of, what's on here. So the first thing is you got to make sure that you're tracking your hours every day. So there's a place on here for the hourly track or the daily tracking of member hours. You also need to distinguish between service, training, and fundraising. So we have those three categories there so that you can track those hours. And putting those hours into grant approved activities. So if you're doing something that's on youth build time, you wouldn't put it on this hour log per se, because it wouldn't be related to their AmeriCorps hours. And then importantly, it needs to be signed and dated by the member and supervisor. Now, I know a lot of folks are remote right now, and we're going to talk more next week about some remote options. But again, now for these sessions, we're just going over the basics of kind of the standard process. So you do need to make sure that these are signed and dated. If they are not signed and dated, then that hour log would not count. So if it's not signed, it's like it never happened. So please make sure you have a process to get those signed on a regular basis, and also to go back and check to make sure that you didn't miss any signatures. So let's talk through the 20% training hour rule. So no more than 20% of a member's total hours can be training hours at exit. The at exit is an important part. You can kind of fluctuate a little bit during the service term, but it's when they exit, it's really important. This rule applies to all members, your part-time members, your full-time members, everybody. And the number of service hours really determines the allowable training hours. It's a ratio. So the more service hours you have, the more training hours are allowable. And this is represented on the hour log in this section right here. So it gives you a breakdown of what the current percentage is. So you enter in the numbers, it'll total them up for you. If you're over that 20%, it will highlight it as yellow. And the reason it's yellow and not red is because it's a warning. You just got to fix it before the member exits, and then you're okay. But that's where it kind of shows up. We also give these like regular updates of members. It's important that members are also aware of kind of where they are with their hours. And this hour log is one way to do that.
So this brings us back to our flow chart that we introduced yesterday. And what we want to focus on right now is this gray box. We're going to talk about suspensions. The reason that it's gray is it's not going to apply to every member. So far, we've been talking about eligibility, timekeeping, everybody in every situation, but suspensions, not necessarily. I think it's going to come up more and more as we're dealing with this pandemic. So definitely something to focus in on now. And even in kind of more normal years, I think it's something that'll come up with at least one of your members. So not everybody, but definitely an important thing for us all to be on the same page about. So what is a suspension? It is a period of time where a member is not serving or accumulating hours, but we think that they're going to be able to come back and do that again. If someone's not serving and accumulating hours, but we don't have a reasonable expectation of their return, then we would go ahead and exit them. But a suspension is essentially a pause. So a few more things to know about suspensions. Every member is going to have 12 months to serve no matter what. So a suspension keeps their time from drifting away. If someone is suspended for 4 months, they would get that time on the back end. So another way of saying that, if I was a member and I started in January and my 12-month term would be up the next January, I had a 2-month suspension. Now my exit date will be moved out to that following March. So it's a great thing, allows us to hit pause as a member resolves something that would keep them from serving. So our full-time members earn a living allowance, and they have other benefits that they get through the grant. If they are suspended, those benefits stop. So it's something to make sure that your members are aware of before you move into a suspension with a full-time member. We don't have those same issues with our typical youth build students though. Should also know that this is an official action that we take in e-grants. So again, e-grants is how we notify our funder, the Corporation for National Community Service, about any kind of important moments in a member's service term. So we let them know when we enroll them, officially start, and if we do need to suspend them, we have to report that as well. And we have 30 days to do that. We learned yesterday about enrollments. That was 8-day window. Now we get a whole 30 days. So you can have the day that it happens in real life, and then you've got several weeks to go in and actually take the action in e-grants. So let's talk a little bit about why. Why would we want to suspend? And there's two reasons from my perspective that we would want to do this. First, we have to. We need to align with the CNCS regulations. And you're seeing our shared language image for protecting the investment. So, I mean, we'll just have to accept. We have a grant here and there's certain things we have to do. But I want to focus more on the second one. I want to flip the script on this idea that suspensions are bad. They are not inherently negative. And when we're talking about our AmeriCorps members, I think suspensions are something to be used wisely to help our members succeed and complete their term of service. So again, if someone can't be serving for a while, we don't want that valuable time in that 12-month term to disappear. So we suspend them to help them be successful in the end. So let's look at 3 main buckets of when you would want to suspend a member. And the first we're calling a compelling personal circumstance. So that's a situation largely out of a member's control that, again, prevents them from serving. What we've seen a lot this year is that first example, a program closure. So that's something that would apply to all of your members, right? They couldn't come in, weren't having any service projects, so we suspend the members. That second example is more individual, right? We have an individual member who's been injured. They can't be out on the service site safely, so we're going to pause their service. I want to point out that an AmeriCorps suspension doesn't have to impact their ability to participate in other parts of your youth build program. So again, maybe this injury prevents them from being out on that service site, but they can still be coming in and working towards that GED or high school diploma while they're suspended. Second category, disciplinary suspensions. So that first bullet line, you're seeing ones that are program determined. What I mean by that is your code of conduct. So every program, you set the expectations, and you're going to have that in your member handbook, but also in your member contract. I have a little asterisk there. We're going to come back to program determined in our next slide. But just knowing you get to choose what those are, and your member contract outlines what would lead to a suspension if those are violated. What's set up in your standard member contract is a verbal warning, written warning, then a suspension. Also in that contract are CNCS determined suspensions, and those are mandatory. They apply to all AmeriCorps programs. If a member was to be charged with a violent felony or possession or distribution of a controlled substance, you are required to suspend them until those charges are dropped, resolved. If they ultimately are convicted, you have to exit them, but we suspend to let things, sort out and figure out what the situation is. And the final category is a designated program break. So I think the best example is we have a lot of charter schools in our network, and they're closed during the summer. So we have several months in a row where there's no scheduled service activities. So they will plan in advance to suspend all of their members for that period. A designated program break is not intended to artificially extend a member's service term. So we're not suspending every 3-day weekend, even a week at Thanksgiving. Your program design should allow for those days off and a member to still be successful in getting to 450 hours. This should be in your member contract as well. Members should know upfront that they're going to be suspended during the summer. And I would recommend putting an allowance in there if you want members to be able to do something on their own. Maybe a statement that says, all members will be suspended unless they have on file an individual service plan, meaning that you've figured out how they're going to be supervised, what activities they're going to do, that sort of thing. So let's go back to a special case of program determined suspensions. One that seems to be the most troublesome and tricky. So absenteeism. Might think of this also as those no call, no show situations. We don't know where the member is or when they might return. I guess over my years, I've just seen that this is tricky. It's hard to know what to do as a staff person when you don't know what's going on with that young person. So I want to start with, what does CNCS have to say? And maybe that will guide us in what we need to do. So this is from CNCS FAQs, and they say, situations in which a member serves 0 hours should be very rare. What is very rare? From the perspective of Youth Build USA, we feel like something stops being very rare if it's happening more than once. So if a member isn't at the program, we don't want to see month after month after month of AmeriCorps hour logs where there's no service. So we want to prevent it before we get there. So we think the best way to prevent that is to have a policy and a procedure. And Lauren Troiano just sent you a link in the chat to our template for a policy and procedure on suspensions and early exits, including this particular case around absenteeism. And by having a well thought out policy and procedure that is followed at your program, I think you're going to get the guidance as a staff member that will help you to navigate this situation. We ask every program to have 2 policies and procedures related to this grant. We have other templates we would recommend that you have, but there are 2 we want you to definitely have, and that's on criminal history checks and this one on suspensions. Again, the hardest things, we want you to have a written policy. So if you open up that template, you're going to see there's some sections in black. Those are the mandatory ones, but there's a lot in red because you're going to have to make some decisions at your program. And to give you an example of what I mean, first decision point is, how long are you going to let a member be absent before you suspend them? And again, by setting a policy, you're not going to have to think about it every time. And it'll be easier. We're treating people fairly. It'll be standardized. It should be no more than 30 days. For your program, you may think, all right, we haven't heard from someone in 2 weeks. We're going to suspend them until we're able to figure it out. Maybe for you, it needs to be a little bit longer or shorter. That's up to you. But again, it should be in your policy. After there's been the suspension, got to figure out who's going to be responsible for what. Who's following up with this young person? How often? When are we talking about it as a staff so we can get this resolved? And then finally, after they've been suspended for absenteeism, how much longer are we going to let them be absent before we eventually exit them from the program? Our recommendation is 60 days. That may feel too short for you. You may think, nope, we need to provide more time. And you can do that. Regulations allow up to 2 years that a member can be suspended. I really don't see why you would need your policy to stretch out that far, but it is allowable. I think having a tighter timeline is honestly going to be helpful. A lot of you are here on this training because you're new to your role. And in those situations, what I'm hearing about is you come in and you're getting to know all these new young people. You've also got these files of a suspended member who you've never met, and you don't really know what the situation is with them. You see that they've been suspended for a year. You're not really sure how to get in touch with them, and it just becomes messy. And I think if you, when you came in, had a policy that guided how you were supposed to handle those files, it would be a benefit. So that's my plug for getting that policy and procedure in place if you don't already have it. We're definitely documenting it in the file, and we have a form that we want you to use. It's very brief and quick to fill out. You fill out the member's name, the day that they're suspended, and why. And then you come back later when you're ready to reinstate them, let them start serving again, and you fill out the date that they came back. Pretty simple. And by having that in the file, you're using it as a placeholder because you're not going to be filling out their hour logs if they're not there serving. So you want to have that in there to tell the story of why there isn't an hour log for maybe June and July. It's because they're suspended. Next, in e-grants, as I shared earlier, anything of this significance we have to report to CNCS. You're going to go in there. It's also really quick, a very quick process, much easier than the enrollment one we looked at. And then finally in DYB. We haven't talked about that much yet, but we do have videos to support that. And the same reason that we need to report it in DYB and e-grants that I forgot to mention just a second ago is those systems are set up to let a member serve only 12 months. So we have to tell them that it changed so that we can add on that extra time.
So just as a reminder, kind of where we are in terms of the paperwork flow chart, we're getting to the end. So we're going to start talking about exits in e-grants. So, we're going to go through the exits and hopefully get folks to their education award. So let's talk about kind of some final steps that you need to take for your member. So first off, let's talk through, or just as a framework, here are kind of four types of exits that we are going to touch upon. So the first one is talking through the full education award. So everything goes right. Your member earns all their hours. There are no issues. Kind of what does that look like, and going through that process. Also, kind of going through what it means if they don't earn an education award and what documentation you need there. Then we're going to get a little bit more complicated and start talking about partial awards. So partial awards for compelling personal circumstances, and then partial awards for employment. So we're going to talk through all of those in a minute. But for now, let's just kind of check in on the standard process. So before you exit a member, we want to make sure that you go back, make sure all those hour logs and timesheets are signed and dated. Again, if they don't have that signature, they don't count. So please make sure you have all of those. Second, you want to confirm that the training hour limit is in place. So before you exit the member, make sure you're counting those training hours correctly. The exit helper will help you with that. It was in the video from yesterday. If you didn't get a chance to watch that, well, again, we'll have all of these links to resources throughout the conference, so you'll be able to go back and check that out. And then lastly, make sure that you're doing the evaluation. So the member needs that final evaluation of their progress to kind of demonstrate kind of how far they've come and where they are in the program. So then you go to the online system in eGrants and My AmeriCorps and sort of how those exits work there. So here's a flow chart of how that process works. So first, you manually unlock the exit form. We'll talk about that in a second. Now, it will unlock on its own if you're within 30 days of the expected completion date. The expected completion date is typically 1 year, unless you've had a suspension, in which case it might change. But if you're exiting members early, you're going to need to unlock the form. Then, similar to when we did enrollment, the member is going to fill out their portion. And then finally, the program will complete the exit in eGrants. And there's a sort of like side road here in terms of member being unavailable, and we'll talk through that in a bit. Manually unlocking the exit form. What does this look like? So when you're going in and you're checking out a member, you go and you select their record in eGrants, you'll kind of see this little blue underline piece that you can click here. When you click on that, then that'll unlock the exit form, and the exit form will show up in your pending exit work basket. So if you guys remember from yesterday when Lauren went through the demonstration, she kind of showed you the SNN work basket. So when you unlock the form, then you go back to SNN work basket, and that's where you'll see it. The next step is when you kind of unlock that form, it also makes it available to the member in My AmeriCorps. So they need to go in to My AmeriCorps and log into their account. So they got to remember their password, and hopefully you had a way to write down their password when they enrolled, to go back into My AmeriCorps, access the exit form, and then complete it there. In the situation where a member is unavailable to complete their exit form, and so this is a situation where you had a young person who might have left the program and disappeared. So we do ask that the program reach out to the member to try and get them to complete the exit form, even in an unsuccessful exit. We ask that you make at least 2 attempts to do so, and that you document your attempts to do so. So if you're not able to do that, there is a place in eGrants where you check a box that you're saying, you know what, we tried to contact the member, but they're not available, and so we're going to fill out that information on their behalf. So we want you to click that box, and then we also want you to put a memo in the member's file explaining how the program was attempting to contact the member, so that you can show we did our due diligence, we followed the procedures that we were supposed to follow. Unfortunately, the member wasn't available, and we needed to make sure that they are properly exited. So then you go in and actually complete the program exit. So you're going to enter in the total number of hours served, the completion date, and then you're going to select the award status. And this is where you're going to do full award, partial award, no award, in this drop-down menu here. So what is an AmeriCorps completion slash end date? So it more than anything else, it's the last day the member earned AmeriCorps hours. So if you're ever confused about what their exit date should be, go look at their hour log. It should be the last day that has hours on there. It can be different for each member. Each member is going to finish the program in their own time, and some might finish their hours early, so you don't have to have the same completion date for everybody. And it also doesn't need to correspond to the Youth Build graduation date. You might have a member who completes everything of the program, goes through Youth Build graduation, but maybe they still have 20 or 30 hours left in AmeriCorps. They come back to the program, finish those up, and still get their full award. Or you have a young person who does all their hours kind of towards the beginning, and they earn an award, and then they stay in the Youth Build program for a while, and then they graduate from Youth Build, even though they've earned their education award and have their education and their AmeriCorps exit date a few months prior. So it doesn't have to correspond to when they finish the Youth Build program. So this last part I want to say about this exit process, and again, there are resources if you want to see a video that goes a little bit slower and step by step through all of this, we have that available. But there's this box on the exit form that asks you to select, and it says, did the member perform satisfactorily? Complete all assignments, tasks, projects, question mark. Now, this seems like a fairly straightforward question. You kind of think about the member. Did they do a good job? Maybe not. You select yes or no. The important thing to know about this question, which is not apparent when you're filling it out, which is one of the reasons I very much dislike this question, is that if you select no to this question, you are banning that person from ever serving in AmeriCorps ever again. So I want you guys to think really hard before you hit no. And I would say in almost all situations, you're going to want to put yes, because we don't want to cut off our young people from opportunities to serve. I mean, you all know how much people change over time. And the young person, maybe they were in your program and it didn't work out. But that doesn't mean they can't come back later or a few years from now and join your program again or another AmeriCorps program and serve. So we don't want to deprive them of that opportunity. So please, when you get to this portion of the exit form, you're almost always just going to want to select yes. If you're hearing this for the first time and you're like, oh no, I've selected no in the past, you can go back and edit this. So you can go back and change this. And we have had to do that for members before who are re-enrolling in the program. But again, please pay attention to this box, and you're almost always going to want to select yes there. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things back over to Lauren to talk through kind of the different types of exits.
We are going to talk through, as David mentioned before, any additional paperwork that's required, because different types of exits require additional documentation. We're going to talk about any rules associated with that. And then we're going to take like a look back at that flow chart, because how you navigate through eGrants may look a little bit different depending on the type of exit you're doing. So first up, full education award. This is the most straightforward. There is no additional documentation required because this is what's expected. You'll still want to do what David said. You're going to want to check that signatures are there. You're going to want to confirm that it's still, the ratio is right, that 80-20, and then make sure you have that evaluation. Once you've done that, you're ready to go into eGrants and get that member exited, because until they're exited in eGrants, they can't access that education award. For a successful exit, it may be as simple as this. They fill out their part, you fill out your part, and it's done. There's always a chance you may have to manually unlock, but I think it's just going to be as simple as that. So let's look in, a situation there's a little bit more to it. So members who are exiting the program without an education award. There's a form we want you to fill out to tell the story of what happened. That's what the member file is doing. So we're coming to the end, and the story didn't end exactly how we expected, so we need to write up what happened. If you saw in the video in our homework last night, your exit helper can complete this form for you. So you can do it through Excel, or you could print this form out, fill it out, or you could even just have your own memo. But we do want something that documents a situation that led to the member leaving without an award. On this form, we have kind of two different ways that might happen. The member chooses to leave, that's an early withdrawal, or a release for cause where you're asking the member to leave. And if you're doing that, we want to make sure that it aligns with the member service agreement, that you're not doing something that's outside of that contract. So this is what I think is most likely going to happen in e-grants in a situation like this. Someone is leaving early, so we're probably going to have to go in and manually unlock in e-grants that form. If a member left early, I think, again, it's highly unlikely they're going to be able to fill out their part in My AmeriCorps. We still have to reach out, like David said, and document at least 2 attempts. So that could be a memo. It could also be some screenshots, a copy of some emails if that's easier for you, or a letter, text messages. We just want to make it a clear documentation trail of our efforts to reach out to that member. And then finally, you're going to go in and complete the exit form e-grants. We're going to talk about 2 ways to earn a partial education award. Sometimes we refer to this as a prorated award. So as an example, a member earns 40% of their hours, they'll earn 40% of their education award. So it's going to correspond directly. You'll remember compelling personal circumstances. I spoke about that during suspensions. And you can suspend a member for a compelling personal circumstance, but you can also exit them with a partial award for that. So again, this is something that is beyond the member's control that might keep them from serving for a time, or may need to lead to their exit. This list that I have up here comes directly from CNCS. These are the examples they're providing, but they do say there could be more. So this is not a limited list, but it does give you an idea of what we're talking about here. So if you have something else come up, you know what, this happened with the member, I think that this would apply for a compelling personal circumstance exit, come talk to your portfolio manager and we'll figure it out together. So let's look at the documentation and some other rules related to this. First thing to know, the member has to have completed at least 15% of their hours in order for this to be possible. So that's the minimum threshold. You're going to fill out this form, this standard form that we have on myouthbuild.org that you can download there. And the member is going to fill out a part, you're going to fill out a part, and then you're going to attach documentation. I think this is the hardest part of this type of exit, is coming up with documentation. Because if this has come up, we have something unexpected, something challenging that is happening in this young person's life, but we must get documentation in order to move forward. Recommendation is that you go with a third party. It is the strongest if it comes from an outside source. So let's talk about a similar but slightly different way to earn a partial award, and that's for employment purposes. So this is applying to our Youth Build AmeriCorps members, not our full-time members. This is another one of those things that's kind of special to us because this is one of those outcomes that we're seeking in our program. So if a young person is leaving to take on an employment opportunity, and that's going to prevent them from finishing their service term, they could earn a partial award. So limitations on this, they have to have completed at least half of their AmeriCorps hours. So before it was 15, now we're at 50 for an employment exit. And as a reminder, all those other rules still apply. So we still need that ratio between service and training. And the member can secure employment during their service term or even within 30 days of their last day of service. So that's the window of when the employment can be secured. And this is intended to support a successful exit. So I think the example I would give is we have a young person who's been highly engaged at the program. They've developed those skill sets and those mindsets that they need to be successful as they move out of Youth Build. They've earned those credentials that you want from them. And maybe they have 100 AmeriCorps hours left, but they have an amazing employment opportunity. And you discuss it and you're like, no, you really need to take this. So we're going to exit you with a partial award for employment, and they'll be able to take a partial education award with them. So we're supporting a successful exit, young person's going on to what they need to be doing. But we don't want to abuse exits for employment. This is not a way to get around struggles with finding service opportunities for your young people. We don't want to undermine your program design. We still want the typical to be that members complete their service commitment, because they are making a commitment when they sign that contract to do those 450 hours of service. So again, let's use this to support successful exits when it makes sense. If you have a young person at your program this year that you think needs to exit for compelling personal circumstance or employment, really, really encourage you to be in touch with your portfolio manager. I have folks that I've been working with for years. They do this work really well, no compliance issues, but they still run this by me. There's no reason not to, right? It's good to have a backup. I think David mentioned this yesterday. You'll have an email that will say, "Well, they said it was fine," so we can be your backup on these kind of things. And what we're going to ask you for, what we're going to double check, is that you filled out that form, everything is signed. We're going to check your documentation to make sure it's strong and that it makes sense. We're going to look at those hour logs to make sure it's signed, that the ratio between training and service is on point, and then we're going to make sure that you have that final evaluation. And then a final look at this flow chart. Anyone who's exiting with a partial award, I think this is most likely what that's going to look like. You're going to manually unlock the form in eGrants. The member will go into My AmeriCorps and fill out their portion. And if someone's leaving with an award, they really should be filling out that portion in My AmeriCorps themselves. And then you're going to, of course, go in, enter their number of hours, and complete the exit.
So we're going to do an activity before we close out for today. So I think like a lot of people in the current times, we're finding new hobbies and doing things to keep us sane. And the one that's really helped me out is playing Dungeons and Dragons. So I play a lot of games with my nieces and nephews. So they're spread out across the country, and we are able to play online virtually. And I serve, for those who aren't familiar with kind of how Dungeons and Dragons work, I serve as the Dungeon Master, which is the person who's kind of the referee and helps tell the story. So the way the game kind of overall works is this collective storytelling. And I wanted to kind of bring some of that feel into our session. So it's not going to be quite like D&D, but we're going to have a little bit of an activity to go through some of these exit scenarios and to really test your understanding and to have you guys dive a little bit deeper in and ask questions and get through those. So the way it's going to work is I'm going to set up the scene as the narrator of the story. Then you're going to have a couple polls to decide how you want to react to my narration. And then when we get to the scenarios, you guys are going to use the chat to answer the questions. And then the character that I'm going to be playing throughout this is a mysterious wizard who is going to be judging you all on your answers. And I didn't give him a name, but some call him Tim. So with that, we're going to kind of dive into the scenario. So you guys are in kind of what's to be kind of like a bare room almost. When somebody emerges from a portal, it's kind of a gray bearded wizard appears before you, and the portal looks like it's from another world. So we're going to go ahead and do a poll. How do you guys respond to the sudden appearance of this individual? Most of you guys decided to respectfully introduce yourself. Wise course of action, wise course of action. So you all come over to the wizard and kind of respectfully tell him your name. Well, if it isn't respect for the elderlies in these days, I must say I'm slightly surprised, but also it is appropriate for the situation. Now we shall begin your trial. I should let you know the stakes before you begin. You're currently trapped in the realm of Zoom, and only after you answer my questions will you be allowed to leave. Now, if you answer the questions incorrectly or falsely, I shall do something terrible, like release a plague upon your world that forces you to stay inside and not interact with your friends and family. What's that? I'm being told that's already happening. So I'm not going to do that, but I'll come up with something else that's terrible. I don't know, zombies or something. But the point is, if you don't answer my questions correctly, there will be wrath. So first, the rules. You're going to choose your type of exit by using the chat. Indicate with the FA letters for a full award, CPC for a partial award for compelling personal circumstances, PAE for a partial award for employment, and IN for no award. These are the only acceptable responses, and anything else will be thrown out and considered incorrect. The first scenario, if you are ready. Juan has been an excellent member, completing over 50% of his hours and even recruited his brother James to the program recently. He earned his GED and has been accepted to a local community college. What do you do in this scenario? Is he eligible for a full award? Can you do personal and compelling? Is it employment, or does he not get an award at all? Put the answer into the chat, and then you shall be judged. I see some division within the ranks. To be expected, to be expected. Well, it does appear that a majority of you have landed on the correct decision, although I will say I did see a variety of answers, so I am magnanimous in allowing the majority to rule in this case. Unfortunately, this individual won, while being an excellent individual, would not receive an award because there is no exit for going to university. We promote this, of course, higher learning. As a wizard, I know, of course, all about learning. It is important to us all, but it unfortunately does not fall within the exit for employment guidelines, nor other AmeriCorps guidelines, and therefore, sadly, Juan would not be eligible for an education award in this scenario. Only if he completed all of his hours could he earn an education award. Another piece, and I will give this to you for free because I am such a helpful wizard, is the documentation. In this case, we would not need any additional documentation other than the documentation that Lauren went over earlier around how to do these exits for a member who unfortunately would not earn an award. Well, again, we are very proud of Juan and his pursuit of higher education, but he would not qualify in this circumstance. Next, we shall move on to the next part of your trial. Janet, within 30 days of her exit, gets a part-time job at S-Mart after completing all of her program requirements. So Janet, within 30 days of her exit, gets a part-time job at S-Mart after completing all of her program requirements. And I will throw in, because my assistant foolishly left it off, Janet is also over 50% of her hours. What would this be? Go ahead and put it into the chat. She is not at full hours, but she is at over 50%. Now I'm seeing some responses. I think some people answered early before that correction. Again, my mortal assistant was lax in his preparation, but we can correct for that now. So I see the majority of people have already answered. And again, this time there was a bit more uniformity. It seemed a little bit more confidence as you move along in the trials. And indeed, this would be a partial award for employment, as many indicated within the chat. So even though this is only part-time employment, it would still count on the AmeriCorps standards, which, as I'm sure you all know, are regular employment within the previous week, which is a rather loose definition by my standards, but it apparently works for AmeriCorps. And once again, I will be grateful in showing you what documentation you should provide. In this case, a pay stub. I'm not quite sure what that is, but I've been told it's used in your world. Or an offer letter for employment. So if you can find something from this S-Mart organization to show that Janet is indeed an employee there, and you can do so within 30 days, you could exit this individual with employment, and they would get a partial award prorated to their hours served. Let us move on to the next scenario. James follows in his brother Juan's footsteps and does an excellent job at the program. He finishes his GED and has a 50% of his hours done. He recently found out that his mother is sick, so he gets a job to help support her. What would you do in this scenario? Would the individual award a full award, the CPC exit, an employment exit, or no award? What do you think? Go ahead and put your answers into the chat. I'm seeing a variety of responses yet again. Some people saying he should receive a full award, some people saying he should receive employment, some personal and compelling. So thank you all for taking the time. Let us see what the answer is. In this case, it would be an exit for personal and compelling, so CPC. for those who put that in the chat, and not employment. The reason that this is not employment is that employment was not the inciting incident for him leaving the program. It was indeed his sick mother that caused him to leave the program. The employment exits really should be a time for celebration. The individual has done an excellent job. They've earned over 50% of their hours, and now they're moving on in their life to the next step in their journey. That is the emotion you should have with an employment exit. Compelling personal circumstances exits are often rather sad and dour, as in this case, where the individual has to leave and take care of his mother. So this is an important distinction. Even though employment did play a factor, it was not the reason why he was leaving the program. And again, let's make sure we document this properly. In this case, we would want some evidence or third-party proof of his mother being sick. So we would ask for a doctor's note. Now, let us continue along. You are doing rather well. Janie is pregnant, and she has finished over 15% of her hours, and she wants to leave the program. What shall we do? Should she get a full award? Should she be exited for compelling personal circumstances, employment, or unfortunately, would she not get any award? What say you in the chat? I see. Again, division, as other people have different perspectives. Well, let us go ahead and move forward. What would the answer be? We would be a partial award for compelling personal circumstances. Now, there was an update in information specifically related to pregnancy and childbirth that the program cannot require a member to justify wanting to leave the program their term of service for pregnancy. If an individual establishes that they are pregnant and wishes to leave, the program is not in a position to question that. Likewise, the program cannot require that a member leave their term of service due to pregnancy. That decision ultimately falls on the member, as falls within their rights under anti-discrimination legislation. We don't have that in our realm, but I've been told that there is some federal protections for you all. And AmeriCorps recently clarified how that applied specifically to the case of pregnancy. And once again, we would seek out similar documentation from a third party. And because this is dealing with pregnancy, we would want a confirmation from the doctor, ideally. So let's continue. So Jamal has been excelling at the program, and unfortunately, due to COVID-19 pandemic, he has not been able to serve enough hours to earn his education award, and his service term is over next week. What should we do? What should we do? Corey asked an excellent question. What is the percentage of hours that Jamal has currently earned? We shall say he is currently at 35% of his service term for the sake of this example. So that may change other people's perspectives. We shall see as people put things into the chat. Gary with an excellent suggestion to call Lauren, for she is wise and knowledgeable on these matters. I believe we have enough responses to move forward. A partial award if between 15 and 50%, and a full award if over 50%. This is a good example of a current change in different circumstances. We're not going to get into all the details now. You'll have to tune in next week to find more about this. But there are special circumstances related to COVID-19 that affects a member's exit that everyone should be aware of. So we will be covering this in depth next week. If you do not join us next week for whatever reason, I cannot imagine, then you can find this information also available on our website. For documentation purposes, again, we will go more in depth, but just as an example, we would want local emergency orders, something from the program policy changes, and perhaps an announcement or memo in the file. So again, we will discuss this in depth, but for now, you should be aware that there are indeed special circumstances around COVID-19 which could affect your members' capacity to exit. And lastly, I'd like to remind everyone that all of these exits do require a form. There is a form for an early release. There's a form for compelling personal circumstances. There's a form for exit for employment. So please make sure you check out the website to get the proper documentation and the forms. So thank you all for going through the trial and answering your questions. There were some mixed results here and there, but overall, I was impressed with your performance and your capacity to navigate these challenges. So kudos to you all. We will be temporarily releasing you from the realm of Zoom soon. But before we do that, there are a few other things I want to go over. Let's stop here for a poll to see how you react to passing your trial. So you all, after passing the wizard's trial, stand straight-backed and with a proud look on your face, just give a respectful nod to the elderly wizard as he nods and returns and then retreats back through the portal. Perhaps never to be seen again, perhaps to be seen again. We'll see. So thank you guys for indulging me in that, and hopefully had some fun doing that and learned some things along the way. So yeah, I'm a big fan of collective storytelling, and I also just wanted to point out that kind of the way that we did the polling, and that some people kind of did different choices, but ultimately we went with kind of what the majority decided to do. And I think this also kind of relates back to our AmeriCorps grant, in that we all have this collective responsibility. We're telling a shared story about AmeriCorps and our impact in the world. And it also relates to the compliance side of things. So we all want to make sure that we're on the same page and doing everything we can to protect the investment. Because if the majority of people, I had written out what would happen if you guys decided to run away, or if you guys decided to dab in the wizard's face, right? So if a majority of people decide to take reckless action with our grant, then it affects all of us. So please kind of keep that in mind, as we go through these trainings for the rest of the day and into next week, of our collective story around AmeriCorps, and how we want to stay united and keep it intact, both for our programs and moving forward. So with that, congratulations. We have made it up to the end